What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you the final part in my walkthrough for the Ultimate Challenge in Pillars of Eternity 2 Deadfire, using, of course, my own run as the footage, as I was the 15th person to do this, or at least complete the official challenge. Now, obviously, we're kind of at the end here, so I'm not going to explain all that, but there will be some useful links down in the description if you need them. But from this point on, we are basically continuing our boss rush, and in particular, we're going to breeze through the DLCs, wrap up the quests we need to do in order to finish the game, that is to say, get past Andra's Mortar, which is a physical land barrier, or sea barrier more aptly, that we need to get past in order to get to the end area of the game. But as I mentioned just in the last part, this is where things start to accelerate very quickly because pretty much all we're doing is tracking down the bosses we have to kill and killing them at this point, or at least doing our best to do so. Now, with all of that said, let's actually dive into this properly. So picking it back up right where we left off after killing Consulhat and returning to Arkemir to receive the reward of his grimoire, we're of course going to wind up equipping that grimoire as it's going to be helping us out quite a bit, specifically a spell it has in it called Arkemir's Brilliant Departure, which I'll explain a little more when we start using it. But eventually we're going to leave Neketaka, which is as good a time as any, basically the last time in fact, that you're going to get a really good chance to upgrade any remaining parts of your ship to faster equipment, such as the palm sails, and a living steel anchor, which actually also gives you a little bit of sail speed. But of course, make sure to sort out your food and water, because we're about to set sail for Kazuwari, which is where the first DLC takes place, Seeker, Slayer, Survivor, or the first DLC we're going to tackle, I should say. Now, in order to actually do that, we are actually going to respec here. As I've mentioned, going up to this point, the abilities we pick largely remain the same, though you can drop Essential Phantom at level 11. We're not going to need that anymore, but otherwise all the abilities and stuff remain the same that we've picked up throughout the series. Now, the main reason we're doing this respec is actually in order to grab some specific skills to pass some checks over the next little bit, which is going to make our life a little easier. Basically, we're going to go mostly all in on stealth, but then for our passive skills, we're going to put 9 in history, 8 in religion, and 6 in survival. Now from there, we're actually going to go to the deck of our ship, and specifically to the interior cabin, which is where we can interact with a crate that we will have gotten a notification about up to this point in order to start the Seeker Slayer Survivor DLC. Basically, a spirit is telling us to go there, so that's what we're going to do. Now, from Neketaka, Seeker Slayer Survivor is essentially on an island that is almost due west of Neketaka, called Kazuwari. Now, on your way there, you will need to watch out for storms. The storms are pretty deterministic, and there are 2 very large ones enhanced by the Andra's God challenge that like to go up and down this area, so you really need to be careful to skirt around those. But once you are at Kazuwari, you'll be confronted by the God Galawain, because this is his whole deal, but going to the only area we can, the pass area, we're first going to sneak by the initial encounter only to then come to the depths area where we are going to actually go up to the well there and use a grappling hook to descend down it, getting us to an entrance where we can bypass a bunch of stuff that we would normally encounter on the way here. But we are going to be met with a vine wall next, and we're going to have a few options for getting rid of it. And the option you actually want to pick there if you're wanting to save some time is to burn it down, because all of the other options typically waste a few hours, and if at this point you're tight on time in terms of the game's time limit that we have to complete it thanks to the Aethys God challenge, you really don't want to be wasting time on frivolous things at this point. But otherwise, we then step into the next chamber only to be confused with the next contestants that are going to be heading into the arena shortly, which is the room we found ourselves in, the sort of prep room, which throws us directly into this combat encounter, because what Seeker Slayer Survivor is effectively an arena DLC with a story attached to it. Now, it's important to mention that for every single fight we do here, we're going to enter it stealth, which means you want to hit stealth before you hit the exit door here. It is incredibly important we start every one of these fights in stealth. You won't have an opportunity to do it outside of that. Now that brings us to the arena against the sort of intro boss. Now what we're going to do here is put Halt on Vela, run up to the big glowy orb, and then immediately use our priest spell, Shadowing Beyond, or Arkemir's Brilliant Departure if you wanted, in order to go back to Vela, and then once this thing inevitably targets her, we're going to withdraw, only to Shadowing Beyond again, in order to get them away from us and sort of back to their initial spots. This is going to give us the chance to then do our typical Wall of Fire to trigger Brilliant, to then start our wind up on all of our buffs and abilities that we're going to give ourselves, because as a reminder, Barath's combat challenge basically means that combat does not end until we die or we win, thus allowing us to buff up in a way we would not typically be able to. So skipping ahead a bit, once we are buffed up, the fight itself is pretty easy. The first thing you want to do is destroy these little like sigil pillars, because what they're going to do is keep spawning these blights in around the big glowy orb, and it's going to be really annoying because those guys can potentially stun you. And while you're doing this, you need to make sure that none of them happen to go after Vela. It's a good time to hit her with withdrawal, but because some of these guys are ranged, sometimes they will lock onto her if you're not paying attention, and you need to be very careful about that. But once the pillars are down, you basically just AoE everything else down, including the big guy, the Tyrant of Decay or something like that. And that's pretty much that entire fight. It takes a minute, but it's not particularly difficult. Now, once that's done, we're going to be kicked back into the sort of waiting room we found ourselves in to begin with before people explain what this place actually is, which I've already told you. But at this point, we go straight north from where we are to go speak to the woman in charge who's going to direct us to the memory pool. Now, we got to move quick here because in a perfect world, you're going to carry your buffs through to every single one of these fights, which is going to save you a lot of time in terms of buffing up. But in the room with the memory pool, this woman explains that you can basically access these fights through this little pool, which is exactly what we're going to do. We have a few intro fights to get into before we do some more of them. Now, the catch here is you need to be in stealth when you interact with the pool. That way you are in stealth when the combat starts. But starting with Trial of the Naga, the first thing we're going to do here is exactly what we did previously. Halt Vela, run in to start combat with the Naga. Ideally, you want to start using Archimir's Brilliant Departure here because it's going to confuse enemies and make them fight each other. But then we're going to run back, withdraw Vela, Archimir's Brilliant Departure again, and then we're going to try to get these guys to all go back where they came from. That can take a minute. Sometimes these Naga like to linger on the left side of this little circular area, which can be a little bit frustrating, but eventually they will leave you alone. And once they do leave you alone, you can start properly getting your buffs back up. But we should be casting Salvation of Time this whole time if we're carrying our buffs forward like we're supposed to be. So we're not at risk of losing anything, like say barring Death's Door, keeping us from dying, or our resto for our various spell slots. But the gist of it is you want to use Archimir's Brilliant Departure to confuse some of these guys thanks to their lower defense stat for that. And eventually they'll start killing each other, which will help them get back on the right side of the field. Now, once you've eventually sorted that out, basically all we're going to do is protect Vela and then go up to where the enemies are and drop Storms of Holy Fire on their little totems first, ideally, and then put as many of them down as you can. You do need to be a little bit careful. It's possible for these guys to stun you, which is annoying, but other than that one thing, that's pretty much all they've got going on, and you can just kind of decimate them. Now, to explain a little bit of what Archimir's Brilliant Departure actually does, it will teleport you away, make you invisible with a buff, while also trying to confuse the enemies around you to make them fight each other, if it goes through. Now, the thing about that is that, as I mentioned, that invisibility that we get from this spell is a buff, which is not the case for Shadowing Beyond. So when we use this one, we can actually then cast Salvation of Time to keep that invisibility up and make it effectively permanent until we take an attack action. That's going to be important later, but the gist of the rest of this fight is to just AoE these guys down until they're all dead, and that's pretty much all she wrote for that one. Which then, of course, dumps us back into the waiting room. Same thing as before, you might want to try to heal up with your little simple priest heal spells that will be restoring because of Brilliant. Head back to the memory pool, immediately stealth, and then jump into it. This time for Memories of a Madman, which is a throwback to a fight we had in Pillars 1. This one is very easy. Again, make sure your buffs are active, barring Death's Door, all that. Like with most of these fights, run in, immediately cast Archimir's to get away, and if you're lucky, they actually won't even get to Vela for this one because she is so far away from them because of where you start this fight at. There's actually a chance you won't need to protect her at all, and then you can just start buffing up immediately to get ready to go. But once you are buffed up, this fight is very easy. Just protect Vela, AoE these guys down. They really can't do much to you, provided, of course, all our buffs are active. Once that fight's done, again, we find ourselves back in the sort of prep room, heal up, run up to the memory pool, hit stealth, join the next trial, where this one gets a little more tricky. So we're going to stealth our way over to this left corner where these stairs are. We're going to halt Vela here before we actually start combat the way we have been up to this point. Protect Vela, as always, and then eventually you'll be able to get away from these guys. Now, it is probably worth a mention that some of these guys can get sort of stuck where you are, so you'll have to sort of carefully remove them from you, or, stop casting spells long enough that they eventually just lose interest in what's going on over here, which can be a little bit annoying. But at some point, you should be able to get them to leave you alone, but worst case scenario, you should be able to AoE the ones down once you're buffed up, which you can do while invisible for the most part, because unless it's an attack spell specifically, it will not typically break the invisibility from Archimirs. But essentially, once you're buffed up and Vela's protected, just AoE these guys down for the most part. And that fight will, of course, be knocked out. Now, unlike the previous fights up to this point, we're going to get a little dialogue thing here afterwards, where we can redirect the spirits of this place into another place. What we're going to do with this first time this happens, because there will be several, is that we are going to return the soul essence to the wildlife. This is going to give us a buff called Galawain's Gift, which is just generally pretty handy. After this, we yet again get thrown out into the waiting room. We need to go back to the memory pool, but the catch is, this time we are not going directly back into a fight, but rather we have to go get an object from the island, or at least one of them, mind you, in order to continue with this DLC, which means we need to take a short little road trip. Now, the sort of annoying thing about this is no matter which one of these you choose or how you do this, this next part is going to clear our buffs, which is really annoying for the permanent buffs we've had on us, like the Captain's Banquet, that kind of thing. It's all going to get cleared here in just a moment, which means you'll have to reset them. Some of that stuff we should be able to do pretty easily, like if you have a Luminous Adra potion on you and you want the +2 to your skills, you can add that now. No problem at all there. But after we talk to the other guy in this room, Ngari, he's going to give us all this info before we head out onto the island. Now, unfortunately, because we are traveling in the overworld map, there is no way to carry our buffs through this next part. There simply just isn't enough time for us to do that. But once we've got all that info, what we're going to do is simply step out onto the archipelago. First, head to the ravine area for a text event. What you want to do is actually reinforce the bridge with magic. Just cast web on it. This will prevent you from having any problems when you cross it. And then from that bridge, we're actually going to go to the Kohatakana Expanse. Now, depending on which of these 3 locations you go to on the map here, it will give you a different item, which means you'll face different fights back in the Crucible area, the main DLC area. We're going to this one because A, it's the closest, but also the fights are going to wind up being the easiest for us in the long run. The first part of this forest is a text event where you're going to see a bunch of statues. You take the left or right trail depending on whether or not the statue has a gem in one of its eyes. Just pick the side with the gem, and you'll eventually find your way to a sort of cave door. Make your way through that cave door, and you're going to find yourself in a little clearing with a bunch of spiders. Now, our buffs have been cleared at this point. That is to say, all of our long-term buffs, which means we're going to need to sort of re-up those at some point. But what's more, we've also got to clear these spiders. Now, an easy way to do this is simply use the old trap method from the prior parts where you can drop a trap kind of near the water in front of the spiders. They'll get suspicious and come over, and that will typically be enough to trigger combat all on its own. And then we can start our normal Wall of Fire into Brilliant into the rest of our buffs so we can get ready to fight these spiders. Protect Vela, make sure she's good to go, but once you're buffed up, this is a very easy fight. These are not particularly high level spiders or even interesting spiders in any way, so just AoE them down and they will all die. Once they're dead, we can pick up the item we came here for. We'll see a little scene with the spirit that started this DLC adventure, which is going to give us a little bit of background on what's going on, which is technically important later, but not super important for this video. And then we're going to make our way back to the Crucible. Again, we're going to lose our short-term buffs from that fight, so don't worry trying to keep them up. And then from there, we can head back into the memory pool. So again, stealth before you use it, drop the item in, and then the first fight that we just unlocked that we're going to do is the Secrets of the Ooze. Now, just like all the fights previous, halt Vela, run in, start combat with the oozes, immediately jump away, either Shadowing Beyond or Archimirs, doesn't really matter which, for this particular fight anyway. And then, as usual, Wall of Fire into Brilliant into the rest of our buffs. Once we are buffed up and Vela is properly protected, we can go fight some of these oozes. Now, the catch here is that there are 2 phantoms with all of these oozes. What they're going to do is teleport you. What's more, they're going to teleport you all the way to the other side of the arena within range of the totems that are everywhere, and many of these totems will pulse to give you a wound. And as a reminder, if you get more than 3 wounds, you die immediately. So what we want to do here basically is take out those totems as quickly as possible, while maintaining our stealth in a perfect world via things like Archimirs. Again, you can Salvation of Time that to last longer, while also keeping these guys away from Vela, which takes a little bit of practice. So there's a little more going on in this fight, specifically because you need to get those totems down quickly. But once those totems are down, you're pretty much in the clear and can AoE down everything else, as their sort of main mechanic will have been dealt with at that point. Once we're out of that fight, go ahead and clear any wounds you have with a Luminous Adra if you picked up any during that fight, but from there, straight back to the memory pool, stealth, and right into the next one. The next one being the Spider's Web. So you start this one off in a sort of ambush, which is why it is incredibly important you start in stealth. Now, ideally, we're going to carry forward the buffs from that previous fight, which is going to allow us to get buffed up more quickly, but as always, start combat. This time you want to use a trap on these spiders again, because as the name of this one would imply, you are going to get ambushed by more spiders, and we really need to be buffed up and want to do that in stealth prior to that, which means the typical run up, start combat, and then like Archimere's out isn't really something you want to do for this one. That's why you picked the trap this time around. But once we are buffed up, we can finally start fighting these guys. Now the trick to this one is that you actually want to stay pretty close to Vela for this, because what we're going to do is hit her with Barring Death's Door and sustain that on her with Salvation of Time, because there's simply too many enemies to try to protect her from, and you really don't want to take the chance of messing something up with, say, withdraw dropping when you don't expect it to. So it's easier to do here because these guys are just, big in number but not otherwise threatening to us. If we've got Barring Death's Door up, is simply buff her with that, make essentially us and Vela unkillable in that way, and then just stand next to her while you AoE all of these guys down, keeping you both alive. And it does take a minute because more and more spiders jump into this fight. From there, we get dumped right back into the waiting room where we can question one of those spirits we talked to earlier, but then we take the memory pool after stealthing right into the next fight, Shades of the Seeker. So this fight is a little bit different. As always, halt Vela once we've got her pulled over to the left, start combat, shadowing beyond her Archimere's out, protect Vela, wait for everybody to go back where they were, and then you'll have the breathing room you need to, of course, buff up as usual. But the catch is, once we're ready, we actually have to do something a little bit different for this fight, because the mechanic of this one is that only one of these shades is vulnerable to damage at any given time, and they're actually also capable of killing you. So what we're going to have to do instead is do this the safe way. You see, another thing about Archimere's and Wall of Fire actually is the sort of interesting interaction you have where Wall of Fire will not break the invisibility of Archimere's, which is unusual. Most attack spells do. But because of this, what we can do is sort of use that Archimere's buff to make ourselves invisible, and then use Wall of Fire to slowly, ever so slowly, kill the one shade that is vulnerable at a time. Now this takes a minute, but it will keep you perfectly safe. What you do have to watch out for, though, is that sometimes one of the shades will aggro onto Vela if she gets a little too close or something like that, and you have to keep an eye on it, but otherwise this method will work perfectly well. Now, after a shade dies, all of the shades are going to sort of reset back to their starting position, which means you have to slowly pull them over with the spell again. And the way that works is that every time an enemy grows suspicious and goes to investigate a noise they heard, like say a spell being cast, they will eventually return to their starting position, but they will actually stop just a little bit short of it, which effectively moves them a small amount. And when you do that multiple times, they will eventually sort of reset their starting position in a new place where you want them until another creature happens to die, at which point they'll go back to their literal starting position. It's important to understand how that mechanic works. We're going to make use of it later. But otherwise, once that fight is done, it's back to the waiting room, back to the memory pool yet again for the sort of last fight in this particular phase with Contest of the Seeker. So we're going to fight a 5-man group here, and it's going to be a little bit tricky because one of them's pretty strong. And that's why we're not going to run in here and start combat out of stealth with the typical Archimere Shadowing Beyond. We want to use a trap again because there's a really high chance one of these guys is going to be able to stun you, and you do not want that to happen just yet. Other than that, once you're actually in combat, try to get Vela over to the left side where we were last time we were on this map, but if that doesn't work, basically just protect her and get yourself buffed up. I actually messed this up a little bit, and I wound up putting Vela like right near the middle of the walkway here, which is what you do not want, as it will make this a little bit more annoying, but the general premise is the same. Once you're all buffed up, you can start killing these guys, but the catch is, as I mentioned, they are very capable of stunning and killing you as a result. In particular, they'll lock on to Vela in a lot of cases, which is hard to protect her against while you are stunned. So as a result of that, if you want to do this the safe way, this is another fight where just dragging them all away from Vela and doing the Wall of Fire method is actually really effective here. If you don't want to take any chances, and given the nature of this run, I would say you probably don't. Now, after that fight is over, we're going to get another chance to direct the soul essence of this place, and this time we're going to channel that essence into Muatsu, the spirit that's been following us around. That's important, it's going to come up later. After that, again, kicked back to the waiting room before we have to get ready for another big fight. So, this one is called Battle Royale. And the thing is, you start this one off in a bit of a rough spot, but we are going to stealth into it as normal. Basically, right as the fight starts, we get thrown into a text event. What we want to do is hang back and wait, which is going to give us an injury, yes, but it's going to put us right in front of this giant worm thing we need to kill. Now, what we need to do here is immediately withdraw Vela, after which we're going to Shadowing Beyond or Archimedes away. It's not super important right away. The main thing is once you have gotten invisible, you really need to put Barring Death's Door on yourself immediately. This is why carrying those buffs forward is important from our previous combat so we can maintain Brilliant. Once Barring Death's Door is on us and Vela is safe, we're mostly okay because then we can Salvation of Time to increase our own buff, and then we just got to focus on withdrawing Vela at the appropriate time. Now the catch to this is we have to buff up while we're sort of under pressure here. What's going to make this easier is that the little worms are especially susceptible to Archimedes' charm effect. As I mentioned earlier, when we do that, it will charm enemies around you into fighting each other. The little guys are almost always going to fall to that, and they're going to attack the big guy, which is what we want, because pretty much everything in this little water area is capable of stunning you. The little guys will stun you when they die, which we're going to have to sort of work around. And then, of course, the big guy is just going to cause us all sorts of problems generally. So what we're going to do is keep using Archimedes to keep these guys fighting each other until eventually the big one is dead. Once the big one is dead, we can start focusing in on the little guys. But remember what I said, when these guys die, they will stun you for a short duration, which means if Vela is not safe, she could very well die while you are stunned, which means you have to very carefully sort of cast Withdraw and then do your attacks and sort of time that with the sort of acknowledgement that you're going to get stunned momentarily when these guys die, and you have to be prepared to sort of work around that. But other than that, that's pretty much all this fight is, and it can take a little bit just because of the sort of nature of it with all those stun effects, but it's not too bad all things considered. Now, once all of those guys are dead, we get another text event where another sort of enemy group starts making their way towards you to start a fight. Now, a Drake is going to come after you. You're going to blast it with magic, specifically because it's a corpse. And then once that is blasted, we are going to then slick in the rope with magic. Specifically our oil slick spell, and then that will cause injuries to the incoming team to make them easier to deal with. Now, what we're going to do immediately as that fight starts is stealth again, that we'll have enough distance with us to pull Vela over to the other side. We're going to halt her over here, then we're going to get buffed up ideally, then we're going to start combat as per the usual, before heading back to the right side of the map to get buffed up so we can make sure that Vela stays over here where she's safe. Once we're buffed up, what we can do actually is grab our spiritual ally from being a priest, march him over to the other guys and have him drag them back towards Vela so she gets her terrified state, which causes her to stay still, over on the right side where we don't have to worry about her getting hit by all these other characters over here. But once that's done and we're all buffed up, what we can do is start attacking these guys. Now, you do have to be careful. They will stun you, but you can use things like Archimedes' Capricious Hex to cause all sorts of status effects on them before opening up with like a big AoE. These guys don't have a lot of health. It's just that they're very capable of locking you down if you're not careful, and you really need to try to get some of them dead very quickly so you can avoid that, which is where things like Archimedes' Capricious Hex from his grimoire comes in handy. But if you can get off a couple casts of Storm of Holy Fire, it should be pretty smooth sailing. Now, we are still not done, because at the end of that fight, we get another opportunity to channel the essence of this place, which we are once again going to put into Muatsu. We need to do that twice before this next part. After that, though, we're going to get kicked back out into the waiting room yet again. And as usual, we're going to head up to the memory pool. But this time, we're going to get put into a place called the Beyond, where we have to solve the main problem of this place. Basically, the spirits that run it are running amok, and we need to fix that, which the decisions we've made up to this point that I've already discussed are going to allow us to do. But we're going to meet some of the spirits that make up the statue that's in control of the Crucible, and eventually we're going to make our way down to the last guy, which is normally someone you might have to fight, the sort of spirit that is out of balance here. Now, after we have an initial conversation with him, the spirits we just had little interactions with will come back and we can go talk to them. In particular, we want to talk to the first woman, Aexica. She's been following us around too because of the path through this DLC that we took. Talking to her, we should be able to get an option for what if there's another way. Someone could take your place. Basically, with the empowered Muatsu that we've been pouring essence into over the course of this, we're able to swap him and Muatsu sort of out for each other, which is going to allow us to skip a fight here, which is going to make our life easier. This will restore the Adra pillar here and allow us to leave, which solves this portion of the quest. And we can return to the here. Don't bother doing anything with the tooth. And then from there we can head back to the Crucible area instead of the memory pool this time, because now we're going to take on the final boss of this DLC and the reason we came here to begin with, because it's one of the ultimate challenge bosses. Now, if you want, you should have gotten like this wolf skin helmet while you were doing this DLC as one of the rewards. If you want to throw that on, you get a decent buff for the fight that we are about to undertake, but it's not like strictly speaking necessary either. But stealth before you enter the room here, because what we're going to be fighting is Porakoa, this giant sort of alligator looking thing. And we're going to be very close to it when we start the fight, so we need to be in stealth. And then we're going to have a conversation with Galawain because he interrupts. But once that's done, pull Vela over to the left, halt her here, start combat with Porakoa before we, of course, Archimere or Shadowing Beyond away, and protect Vela, get buffed up again. And once we are, we can actually start the fight with Porakoa, which is basically just going to involve dropping AoEs on it once you get them all pulled over to the right side of it, which you can do to get them in place with Wall of Fire. You can actually use that to kill the little guys if you want to, which you might want to because a sort of function of this fight is that Porakoa can use an attack on you that will give you wounds, and ideally you want to avoid as much of that as possible. But otherwise, this is not a really difficult fight. The main thing we're going to do is just drop Storm of Holy Fire on all these guys, and it should die fast enough that it's just not really much of a problem. Definitely mind your wounds, though. If you need, you can drop the Luminous Adra potions in your quick slot so you can use them in combat if you get particularly worried about it. But eventually you're going to kill Porakoa. This will give you the last chance to channel essence of this place, which this time we are going to send the soul essence to the wheel. This is to get a buff from Barath, which is also handy. It gives you extra damage to spirits, as I recall. But that is actually the end of this particular DLC. We've done what we came here to do, we're good to go, and quite frankly, now we can leave. Now we got a couple more mega bosses and the other 2 DLCs to go, but this is actually the time in which we are going to try to get our food buff back, but also take care of the quests that are required in order for us to pass Andra's Mortar unscathed, which is to say we're going to finish the Principi quest line real quick. We've actually already done the legwork for that, we just need to sail back and forth between a couple of places. While we are doing that sailing, we can actually look for the ingredients for the Captain's Banquet, both in Dunnage and Fort Deadlight. As a reminder, that is luminous lobster, oysters, and rum. We combine all those together via crafting to make the Captain's Banquet, which is an incredibly nonsense food buff that we can get if we rest with it. In a perfect world, while we're going back and forth between Dunnage and Fort Deadlight, we're going to grab that stuff, make the Captain's Banquet, and then we can have those buffs active for the next couple mega bosses and the upcoming DLC fights, and because it gives us immunity to a bunch of afflictions, is going to be extremely helpful. So you definitely want to do that while you're doing this next part. Otherwise, though, we're going to sail from Kazuwari down to Dunnage. Once we arrive at Dunnage, while we are also shopping for all those ingredients I just mentioned, it's probably a good time to respec away from our sort of odd skills that we were using specifically for that DLC and back into what we are going to use for the rest of the game finally. But first, we can talk to Ferrante, where we can turn in the quest, basically. He's going to ask us to go kill Captain Aeldus, his rival. Instead of doing that, what we're going to do is go to Captain Ferrante's room and ultimately steal some papers from him. But in order to do that, we need a decently high mechanics. Now, this is probably a good time as well to swap out whatever ring you are using in addition to Kuwaru's prize from Oreo Koiki to the diplomacy ring we picked up in Fort Deadlight all the way back towards the beginning of the series. That's going to give us some extra diplomacy, which is handy. And we're going to need, as a matter of fact. But as always with the respecs, the skills we need are going to stay pretty much the same. Or the abilities and spells, I should say. But for our actual skills, we're going to get 11 mechanics, and then with our buffs, that's going to give us enough to open up the thing we need to open. 9 stealth, 8 religion, and 13 diplomacy. But what we're going to do in Captain Ferrante's quarters is actually pick the lock on the chest near here next to his desk, and this is going to give us access to a message that we're going to take to Captain Aeldus here in just a minute. It's a letter between him and the Director Castol of Old Valia. Now, we're going to use that to get passively, so to speak, through this next quest line. And once we are respect with that message in our hand, we're going to leave Dunnage and sail to Fort Deadlight. When we arrive, we'll be met at the gate with somebody who's going to escort us to see Captain Aeldus, who then we can talk to. So we're going to come to basically explain that Captain Ferrante is trying to kill her, and we're going to pick the we're in this together, me and you option. And basically we're going to explain that what we want out of that is the floating hangman, the ghost ship we've been seeing around, and then we're going to provide her the evidence of, Captain Ferrante doing what he's not supposed to do with the slavers all the way back in Crookspur. This is where we present that letter we found in his office. Now from here you can actually loot a little bit of Fort Deadlight that you likely have not seen up to this point, and you can also check for any supplies we don't happen to have at the moment. This should be around the area that you're able to get the Captain's Banquet buff back up, which will be really good at healing any of the curses you may have picked up during the Seeker Slayer Survivor DLC, which can only be healed with a rest. But once you're ready, basically sail back to Dunnage again. This is going to ultimately see him hanged by his fellow Principi, effectively ousting him from power. After that's done, we're going to sail back to Deadlight one more time in order to speak to Captain Aeldus, basically to say that the plan went exactly, that everything went according to plan, and then you can sail back to Dunnage with her, which won't cost you any time. Now this is where Captain Aeldus is going to explain to us how to get a hold of the ghost ship that we've been seeing around. Well, basically what we're going to do here is use that sword we pickpocketed off of the Death Guard all the way back in Nekataka in order to call the ghost ship to you, and then we're going to use a whole bunch of diplomacy to basically trade for the ghost ship. The ghost ship gets a free pass through Andra's Mortar, but it's a bit slow. So what we're going to do is, now that we have everything we need to make that happen, simply wait until we're right at the threshold of Andra's Mortar to do so. Now this is where Scordeo's Edge comes in. So the reward you get from Captain Aeldus for doing all that is a sword called Scordeo's Edge, which has a ridiculous enchantment for this build specifically in this challenge. It's called Blade Cascade. What it does is removes the recovery time or the cooldown of your attacks every so often once that buff is active. But like everything else we're doing, we're going to use Salvation of Time in a perfect world to capture the buff from Blade Cascade after hitting Vela with it from protecting her to trigger the buff that reduces that recovery time. And then we capture it with Salvation of Time and then re-up it, effectively meaning that our attacks and actions have no cooldown or recovery time. Now, in a perfect world anyway, that's what you would be doing, provided, of course, you manage to actually find a tusk along the way in some of the various shops. The ones in Nekataka in particular, because that tusk is what you need and we don't get it from anywhere else, in order to enchant Blade Cascade onto Scordeo's Edge. Now, I unfortunately did not manage to actually get that tusk to make this buff happen, so I had to do some upcoming fights the hard way, and we're going to talk a little bit about that obviously, but they can be much easier than what you're about to see. This is basically the hardest way possible. But once we've got all of that done, we're basically free to leave Dunnage for the last time, and this time we're going to head to an area in between Dunnage and Fort Deadlight that we'll have seen on our way called Murkwater Lagoon. Murkwater Lagoon is home to one of the mega bosses we need to kill, the hardest one, in fact, in my opinion, which just so happens to be the Voracious Mountain. And this fight is going to take some explaining because there's a lot of mechanics going on here, and without Scordeo's Edge, this fight is much, much harder. But before you get into that fight, it's important to do everything you can to maximize your damage. In fact, swapping out that diplomacy ring we just had equipped for any ring that will increase things like fire damage, which you'll have picked up a couple of along the way. And then even the champion's helm that we just got from the DLC area can actually be pretty helpful. But basically any equipment that's going to give us as much damage as possible. So even putting a pet that gives you might in the pet slot as an example. But once we go in and we see the Voracious Mountain spawn in, we again stealth immediately as soon as you get control of your character. Then we're going to start combat by dropping a trap down for the mega boss to run over. You can use spark crackers to bring it over to where you need it to be. in order to get it across the trap, but this is also the last chance you get to prepare what you've got going on. Now the grimoires we want are basically Archimere's as well as Consulhat's Iron Tome, which we got from killing him earlier. We want those in our quick slots, and then we want to ideally put a potion of, I forget what it's called, but it allows you to stun more often with your attacks. Basically everything you do has a chance of stunning the enemy. That's a helpful one if you've got it, as we're going to want that buff. But once we are in combat, we're going to drag Vela all the way down to the very bottom of this beach. Now from here, it's really important to understand what is about to happen. So first up, we have to get buffed up, which, involves our Wall of Fire into Brilliant into the rest of our buffs. That's very important, obviously, and then if you had Scordeo's Edge, what you would do is once you've got Barring Death's Door on Vela is you hit her with Blade Cascade, you hit her with the sword until Blade Cascade procs, and then you capture that buff, kind of the same way we do with Wall of Fire and Brilliant. But eventually we're going to get all buffed up here. And then what we're going to do is we're going to send a spiritual ally up to Hawani Away in order to drag it down to where Vela is so she gets terrified and we can stick her in this exact spot. But this is where we start seeing some of the mechanics at play here. So occasionally the Voracious Mountain will hit you with a symbiote. This spawns even more tiny oozes that can merge together to form bigger oozes. It's important not to move when you've got that symbiote so that you don't actually spawn those oozes because they spawn based on the number of steps you take, up to like 3 of them, I think. But once you've got Vela terrified in place where she needs to be, what we're now going to do is slowly and ever so slowly drag the Voracious Mountain up into the opposite corner of the map. We're going to do this by exploiting that mechanic I mentioned earlier where when you get an enemy to investigate an area, they don't fully return to their original starting position. They stop a little short of it. So what we're going to do is basically abuse that to keep the Voracious Mountain moving to the other side of the map until eventually its sort of starting position, or its sort of default, this is where I go to idle position, is up in the very far corner, as far away as you can get from Vela. That is extremely important, and I'll explain it in a minute. Now, the other thing this is going to do is give us some time on our buffs, because one of the other mechanics that the Voracious Mountain has is this corrosive ability, that every time this enemy hits you, specifically crits you, it reduces the duration of our buffs, and as you are no doubt aware, our buffs are what are keeping us alive. We simply cannot engage in an extended bout with this thing, we will die. But once we've got it dragged up to the corner and we've got a sufficient amount of time on our buffs, we're eventually going to start attacking this guy. And what we're going to do is basically drop Storm of Holy Fire down and try to kill him as quickly as possible so we don't die. Now what we can do here is use Consulhat's Crushing Doom from his Grimoire in order to combine that with Storm of Holy Fire to deal a ton of damage. This guy's got a lot of health, and what's more, once he dies, he doesn't actually die. He instead splits into 2 other entities, the gigantic black oozes. Now the catch with these guys is that this first split still has the corrosive thing, so when these guys together crit you, they will reduce the time on your buffs. Thus, we can't really fight them for very long. Now, once the first guy dies, what we're going to immediately do is hit ourselves with Archimere's Brilliant Departure to turn us invisible, and this is going to give us a chance to re-up our buffs from the fight we just had, and it's going to send these 2 guys just kind of roving around the map. That's their sort of default. Rather than sit in one position, they circle the place. Now, the catch here is, because Vela is so far away from us, they are not technically in combat, and Vela won't trigger combat by herself, so they will safely pass by her and completely ignore her without attacking her. That's why we did all that earlier. Now, the catch is, in order to do this next part, because we're now fighting 2 of these guys, we have to do a couple of things. We have to separate them, basically, and we're going to do that utilizing the method that we did earlier. They investigate sounds from spells and stuff. And this is especially important because at around 50% health left, these 2 will try to merge back into the main guy, which is horrendous. So we want to prevent that from happening. Now, once we've got these guys separated, basically what we're going to try to do is get one of them as close to 50% as we can without actually going over it, which basically means we need to get one of them hurt. And once one of them is down to 50%, or as close as we can get to it, we'll re-up our buffs again to get ready for the final push, and once we've got them fully separated, we can finally fully kill the gigantic black ooze, and then this will, of course, split that one into 2 smaller ones as well. But the catch being that those 2 smaller ones, of course, can't merge with the gigantic ooze to go back into the main guy anymore. Now, this secondary split, these guys will try to re-merge with each other at 75% health rather than 50. Frankly, that is too close together. We won't be able to burst one of them down before they get back merged. So what we have to do is, again, utilize that from stealth, Archimere's Brilliant Departure, as soon as these guys split, in order to drag one of them away from each other. We're basically going to separate it. We're going to take the secondary one over to the top left side of the map using that exact same method. And once we've got that guy over to where we want him, we can quickly burst him down and he'll be too far away from the other guy to start the merge process, which means we'll be able to kill the massive black ooze this time around. Now, everything under the massive black ooze will die really, really quickly to Storm of Holy Fire, which means we don't really need to worry about separating them. We just need to burst them down with Storm of Holy Fire before they have a chance to merge together, because they will try to do it instantly rather than a health percentage. But once you get that sort of first line completely gone, you're pretty much in the clear, because then from there, we can take out the second massive black ooze, which we won't need to move because he'll already be in position, and that will leave us with one gigantic black ooze to deal with, which now that we've completely separated everything out will be pretty easy. But once we get the gigantic one down, it splits into the two massive. Again, we'll have to separate these guys because of the 75% health not giving us enough room to wiggle here. And once that's done, congratulations, you've pretty much won, and you just need to destroy what's left. This fight is a real pain without Scordeo's Edge. What Scordeo's Edge allows you to do, because of that lack of recovery time, is interrupt the merges more effectively, because the way you do this fight normally is that the merge can actually be interrupted. You can do that with spells like the Oil Slick as an example, but without Scordeo's Edge we simply can't do that fast enough to do it reliably, which is why we have to go this roundabout method. Now from there, once we're done killing that mega boss, we're then going to move on to the second one. So we're going to sail south from Murkwater Lagoon to the desert island with the dungeons with all the traps that we were at the very beginning of the game. This is where the next mega boss we need to kill is, specifically at the desert area on the western side of the island. Though do keep in mind as you're sailing from place to place to be handling your food and water as you're going, because while we're sailing a lot, we need to basically stop and get food every time we leave somewhere, like Dunnage or Fort Deadlight, so we don't, have a mutiny on our hands. But once we get down to the Corroded Wasteland, we get met with the Hellfire Construct, or Darudigan. With Scordeo's Edge, this guy is insanely easy. Basically, all you need to do is outpace his ability to heal himself with fire damage. Without Scordeo's Edge, this fight takes forever, but is not difficult. As always, start combat, you probably want to use a trap to do it this time around. Pull Vela all the way away from this guy so you can get buffed up, but the catch is she's going to have to stick next to you for this one because, frankly, this guy does huge sweeping AoEs and you won't be able to protect her far away from you, so you just need to hit her with Barring Death's Door as part of your buff cycle in order to buff her as you fight this guy. So we're going to basically protect her the way we protect ourselves with Barring Death's Door. Now, once you're ready, what I would actually recommend are two things. We want to put on Deltro's Shocking Cage that we got from Nekataka way back when, because then we can hit ourselves with a lightning spell in order to give ourselves lightning damage to our attacks. That's important because it's one of the things he's weak to. We're also going to use a spell from one of our grimoires, Lingrath's Warding Staff. This is because he's also weak to blunt damage. But once we are fully buffed up and we're ready to fight this guy, basically what we're going to do is very, very slowly beat him to death. We're going to try to attack him with our staff, which gets the extra shock damage from the helmet, and ever so slowly, those two weaknesses together will kill him and outpace his healing. Now, every time he tries to do a fire attack, he's going to get healed from the damage that does. So we got to outpace that. Now, in a perfect world, you can kind of position him where he'll shoot his bombs far away and he won't necessarily get much healing from it. But in addition to that fire thing, he also interrupts you really frequently, which means you won't get a lot of hits in. This is why with Scordeo's Edge, we can just more easily overpower his healing. Now, that's pretty much all there is to this fight. It just takes forever. This fight took me like 2 hours of just doing this over and over again. It's not difficult. You're not in danger. It just takes a really long time to do this because of his healing. But once that's done, we are free to leave, of course. Now, we don't really need to do anything special besides head to the next DLC area, but it is on the other side of the map. It is due east of where we are right this moment. We can actually pick up our known locations and go to Harbinger's Watch. We'll have gotten a letter about this already, because now we're going to do the Beast of Winter DLC. In fact, we're pretty well going to fly through this thing. Now, there's no storms you have to worry about, anything like that on the very bottom of the map here, so you can just set the location and go and not have to worry about bouncing around storms. Just, hopefully you have enough food to make the voyage. You will be able to buy some once you get to the Harbinger's Watch, though. Once we arrive at this area, we're going to loot everything in all the buildings, including some food to help us out, but when we're ready, we go up to the Harbinger's Retreat, steal everything there. It's a good time to sell some stuff if you haven't already, by the way. Then you can pick up some food and stuff and sort that situation out, as we're going to be here in this area for a little bit. And then when we're ready, we can go talk to Vatnir. Vatnir is actually a companion that we would normally get as part of this DLC, but is obviously not something we're going to do here. He's basically going to give us the lowdown of what's going on here, but while trying to do so, he gets attacked, or the village gets attacked rather, by a undead dragon, which is causing all sorts of problems. You'll notice that most of the people here will try to get into the line of fire because they're obsessed with the god Rimmergand of Oblivion. But the fight with this guy isn't so hard. Halt Vela at the top of the little ramp here, come down, enter combat with the dragon. Archimir, or Shadowing Beyond Away, go back to Vela, get buffed up as per usual, and once you're ready, use a spiritual ally to get some of the zombies that this undead dragon will summon up to where Vela is, so we can hit her with Terrify. And then at that point, we're free to come down and AoE this undead dragon down. He doesn't really do anything special, we just have to kill him real quick. Once that's done, we'll head back into the retreat to talk to Vatnir again. He's hiding in a secret room off to the right. He's going to give us the ice picks we need to scale the glacier here. We're going to see the dragon get drug off back to where it came from, which is a portal to Rimmergand's realm. Now we're going to use those ice picks to climb up to the next area, which is going to be a little tricky because there's a lot of characters here that cast Arcane Dampener, which will remove our buffs and kill us. So we're going to use some traps to head to our left, disarming some traps as we go, before ultimately starting combat with the enemy group over to the left here. This is going to give us the opportunity to get buffed up towards where we entered the level at. Once we are completely buffed up, we can send the spiritual ally forward to drag enemies down to Vela to get her terrified right where we need her to be so she's not in any danger, and then we can use our various stealth and invisibility spells to get these enemies to leave and go back where they came from, before taking our buffed self up and forward. Now what we can do here actually is use Storm of Holy Fire far enough away from us that we don't actually force anybody to come down and fight with us. But now that we're in combat with both of these groups, what we can do is go kill the guys on the left. And we're going to do that by doing what we did for Console Hot. We will basically hit these guys with Storm of Holy Fire and then cast Withdraw on ourselves to prevent them from removing our buffs. Once the enemy group on the left is dead, we can loot them, come back to the main group now, and do exactly the same thing that we just did. We're going to drop Storm of Holy Fire and then cast Withdraw on ourselves. We're going to do that until pretty much all of these guys are dead, so they do not have the opportunity to kill us. Once these guys are dead, we can then use the exit right near their camp to shimmy down the glacier to the temple area, which is where we need to go next. Now, this is where it gets a little tricky, but basically we want to come across the top of this glacier here, past the constructs, so we don't have to deal with them as long as you're in stealth when you pass them, then nothing will come of that. Then we can disarm some traps, loot some frozen guys, see a little cutscene, before heading to the little cave over here, the West Cave in particular. And there's nothing to fear in here, we can just sort of run south, just try to make sure you hit any traps you can see, before going down straight south to the exit of this place. Try not to explore too much. Then we can disarm the trap in front of us, come down to the bottom level of that overworld area to the Temple of Decline. We're going to enter that. We're going to walk forward, see the dragon being pulled back into the realm of Rimmergand before moving forward, interacting with the statue here where we can actually take the armor by melting it with magic and everything if you want, which can help us out. It's honestly kind of just fun to wear that for this particular DLC, but it's not necessary at all. But in interacting with the portal, we get a conversation with Rimmergand. Remember, be polite. He can kill you in dialogue on multiple occasions. He'll tell you about an item you need before you can pass through this portal without dying. Now we're going to exit the Temple of Decline, head to the eastern cavern from where we just were, and then we're going to talk to an imp here. The imp has the gem we need. It's going to not let us take it amicably, and while you can fight for it, and you likely should still have your buffs from where we were fighting earlier, so it's not a difficult fight, what you can do instead is actually pay this imp like 20,000 gold to just give you the thing. And seeing as we don't really have any use for gold at this point, it's just easier to do that. Then we can head back into the Temple of Decline and use that item that we now possess in order to pass through the portal into Rimmergand's realm. And that's exactly what we're going to do. So once we get into this realm, we're going to get ready for some combat by halting Vela right near the portal, running up to the Soul Collector and the Aurochs before, as usual, stealthing away to get them to leave you alone, protect Vela, of course. If you do it just right, you can actually get her terrified straight away. But then we fight these guys, use a spiritual ally to get Vela terrified if you need, so she doesn't get hurt here. But once you're buffed up and ready, kill these two guys. They're pretty easy. They shouldn't really pose any threat to you at all. And then we're going to head up north, where we see a spirit fighting the dragon, but ultimately getting split in half. Now, the dragon will just tell you to leave, basically, and not fight you right here before smashing through the middle plane. Now, we need to very quickly collect the 3 scattered pieces of that spirit that we just saw. There are 2 to your left and 1 to your right. And then the last one is actually up in the northern section here. Once we have all 4 of those pieces, we can talk to Rinhadir, the owner of that armor we got off the Temple of Decline. Now what's going to happen next is what we're supposed to do is go through the various realms connected to this place and simply give ourselves some help. But we're going to skip all that and jump straight to the fight with the dragon by simply jumping in and ignoring all of that. Now, ideally, you'll have carried your buffs forward with you, and as you step forward into this area, you'll actually come into fight with this dragon, which is actually a lich of sorts, using a phylactery here to maintain itself, which is how it is not dead. What we're going to do is immediately Archimir's Brilliant Departure before hitting Vela with Withdraw and ourself with Barring Death's Door. From there, we use the Brilliant Departure as always to hit stealth, and then we can buff up in relative peace while focusing on protecting Vela at the same time. Once you're buffed up and Vela is safe, the dragon is not a big deal at all to kill. It really can't do much to you as long as you are fully buffed, so we just hit it with our spells, make sure Vela is safe with Withdraw, and it'll be very easy to kill this thing. Once it dies, you will have a text event, and you're going to need to blast the phylactery with something, because remember, this thing's a lich, so blast it with your magic, ideally, and then you'll be good to go. Now, from there, we actually get dropped into the very last part of this DLC, the heart of Rimmergan's realm. Now, what we're going to do is immediately step forward until we see a spirit get obliterated by the wind here, and then we're going to go right back to the starting position of this map and wait a second. Because combat will actually start here automatically because those winds that are blowing through periodically just immediately destroy the spirits, which triggers combat for just everything here, actually. So you get just kind of thrown into combat naturally. We're then, of course, going to use the opportunity to buff up. As always, use a spiritual ally to pull an enemy back to Vela so we can, just kind of park her here for now. Once we're fully buffed up, we're going to go around this area, including making a point to actually go visit the very far left altar before ultimately killing every enemy around us. Once all of the enemies in this area are dead, as long as we've been over to the far left area, we should actually immediately be pulled into a cutscene with the Beast of Winter, Rimmergan's avatar. What's going to happen here is that we are going to incite a fight with this thing, because we have to kill it as part of these challenges, and this is very tricky, and you may want to practice this a few times, but as soon as combat starts, what you immediately need to do is Archimir's Brilliant Departure, then withdraw Vela, and then Barring Death's Door yourself. If you're not really quick about it, it's very possible for either you or Vela to get hit or stunned even, at which point you just die. It's very tricky to pull that off. She will get pulled just like you from the beginning over here. Now, once Vela is safe and you've got Barring Death's Door on yourself, you're probably going to be good to go, because then you can just buff up in relative safety with the Brilliant Departure. And once you're buffed up, you can basically just AoE these guys down with Storm of Holy Fire. They really don't have much going on, and they really can't kill you with anything. And then ta-da, once he goes down, you've finished the Beast of Winter DLC, and we have very little left to do. We can go back, of course, to Vatnir and get our flowers for having done all this. And then the last thing we want to do before we leave is stock up on food and everything, as we're going to need it. Now, once we leave Harbinger's Watch, we are next headed to the Forbidden or Forgotten Sanctum as part of the last DLC we need to do. It is a little bit northwest of where we are right now. Not far at all. Once you see this sort of black volcanic island, you'll know you're in the right place. The dock is on the sort of lower left portion of it. Now, the catch here is that we have to spend a lot of time walking around the sort of spiral path in order to get where we're going. You're going to have a little meeting along the way. You don't need to attack anybody here. Just, move on and go. You can grab some items on the way, but eventually we're going to make our way to the Hall of the Unseen. Now, full disclosure, I get lost in this area a lot. Something about the layout of this place is really difficult for me to sort of remember. It's very winding. But first we got to get through a maze. We basically hit a bunch of buttons to open the doors in front of us. Now, normally what you do here is split your party up to hit the various buttons at different times as you need them. Obviously, we're solo and can't do that, but the catch is, what we can do instead is actually get Vela trapped in these rooms, either just through general pathing or by casting Halt on her to force her into one of these rooms. And then what she'll do at that point is she'll actually activate whatever button is in that room in order to get back to you. And we're going to use her habit of doing that to slowly work our way to the center of this little maze. Now, it's important once you get into the maze to not click the button on the wall in the center of the maze. That spawns a fight. We do not want that fight. You can take the items from the pedestal, but do not click the button in the middle. But then we are down the stairs into the DLC section proper. This is where we're going to meet up with Archmages Lingrath and Tane, who have found effectively a sanctuary of the god Whale, the god of secrets, who's having some fleshy monstrosity problems. Basically, the Titan, or whale's body that it used to travel around the world with, has been just left here, and because of the God of Secrets, they just straight up forgot about it. Now, this next part is important. The order in which you do things in this DLC matters a lot. It changes things and events, so it's very important to do this in the exact right way. Also, the imp nearby these guys will sell a bunch of really good potions, which are very handy. You may consider grabbing them. They can be helpful. But once you're ready, you're going to go down the left path to the enclosures. We're going to do the left side of the DLC first. Now down here, it's important to give yourself buffs to stealth, which means swapping out your Sandals of the Water Lily for the Boots of Stealth, which should still be in your inventory. Because we're going to have to sneak through this next part to make it, not take forever. We're going to enter into a room with this sort of pit in the middle that we watched someone try to jump into. We're going to walk around that to the far room. In this next room, there are Vithrax and sort of Mind Thralls. Vithrax are the giant weird spider-looking humanoid dudes, and they are the only thing that can actually detect us in stealth here. The Mind Thralls will see you, but they will not react to you and will not start combat. You don't need to avoid them. You need to avoid the Vithrax, but that's pretty easy to do because we just need to make our way to the doorway across the short hall here, and then we're going to go left. Right there should be a table. On that table, we get the key that we need. We're then going to stealth back to the room with the pit in the middle of it, avoiding the Vithrax as we go, of course. Now this time, we're going to take the door on the right of the room with the pit on it, where we're going to see more Vithrax and more Mind Thralls. We're going to sneak around the left of that, use the key we just got to unlock the door to the lift. Then we're going to take the lift, of course, down to the next area. We're going to go to the right here, pretty much straight down, right into the door that we see here. And then just to the right of us, actually, when we open that door, there will be a iron door that we can unlock to access this sort of weird organ type thing, like sound organ. And what you can do is reach into it and squeeze hard to destroy some enemies to make a fight we're about to have easier. Now, directly across from that iron gate is another door we need to pass through into a room with a bunch of enemies. Now, with our Boots of Stealth on, we can go up to the top and around the outskirts of this room to avoid the fights with these guys. It is possible to just kill them if you have to, but there's really no reason not to stealth. It's not that hard. But go around the sort of outer portion of the north part and you'll eventually come to an open door. From there, we'll be able to enter the Assembly of Echoes. This is a fight with one of the bosses we need to kill, though it's not particularly difficult. As always, buff up, make sure we're good to go, but essentially what we're going to do, halt Vela, start the fight with the boss, brilliant departure away, buff ourselves up, send a spiritual ally in to, of course, draw something back to Vela to get her terrified so she's safe, and then we can start clearing out enemies. Now, there are a lot of adds in this fight, and as it goes on, they can sort of be summoned in. These are like groups of little sorcerers and whatnot. Our main approach here doesn't really change. We just Storm of Holy Fire everything, while simply making sure Vela is safe. So you do have to be careful. The terrain here is rough, so you're going to be walking quite slowly. But the thing is, the main thing this guy tries to do, ideally will be immune to if you have the Captain's Banquet buff on from the food that we hopefully got while you were running around Dunnage and Fort Deadlight again from after losing it in the first DLC we did. If we have that buff again, this guy's just not dangerous because he can't charm us basically, so it's pretty easy. Then we go south from that room, which is going to bring us into like a large little library area. We're going to talk to the main person here, the chief librarian, as it were, before heading up the sort of right path, right back up to where we were when we first started talking to the Archmages, or the Temple of Revelations. Now, once we get back and talk to them, we're going to see a little cutscene with the General Fountain where we're going to be pulled into a conversation with the Oracle of Whale. Now, as long as we took the enclosure side first, we actually can skip a fight that would normally happen here. So we're going to skip that part and kill the Oracle here in a minute, in a much easier way. Now, this time we're going to take the right path, which brings us to the area's actual library, a place called the Central Stacks, which we're going to move through as quickly as we can by going to the left area, going up the stairs into the library. Then we're going to knock over a stack of books on the table up here, which is going to distract some of the librarians and allow us to steal a book off of this shelf. We're going to need that in just a moment, but then we can continue north to this next area where we can then, using our stealth and everything, steal another book right next to these 3 pedestals. It's really important that we get both of these books on the way here. If you're quick, you'll actually be able to maintain the buffs from the memory hoarder fight. We're going to put these books that we just stole onto these 2 pedestals and then interact with the central pedestal to open this door in front of us. This will bring us to the restricted section, or the restricted books, as it were. You can swap off your boots of stealth for your sandals of the water lily here if you want. But we're going to go north into this little central library hall area, halt Vela, go down to the south, start combat with these guys, brilliant departure away. Buff up, get Vela terrified via spiritual ally as usual, but once you're buffed up, you're actually going to go north and then kill a little sort of mini boss encounter with 5 pedestals for books this time around. Once you're in combat with everything, go ahead and use your Storm of Holy Fire to kill everything down here, of course. Nothing is particularly dangerous, though do be careful with some of the mages in the southern portion. But once everything's dead, what we actually want to do is go through this whole area and loot all of the bookshelves that we need. We're going to find the 4 books that we need so we can interact with the book pedestals where that little mini boss guy was. So we can then interact with the central pedestal there, which will open the next door to some stairs over here. Now, from these stairs, we're going to go directly to our right in stealth, mind you, and steal the book from this big statue. Then we're going to go south from where we entered the place at, down this hallway. You don't have to be in stealth much at this point. Disarm some traps as you go, but just keep heading south down this hallway until you hit this lever at the dead end. This is going to open a wall down here where we went up the stairs to begin with, which is going to allow us to come back to this main area that we entered. Stealth from here, and then we can interact with the door using the incantation from that book we just stole to open this door, which brings us to one of the more mechanical fights that we have to deal with against the sort of defense mechanisms in the Oratory of Whale. As we move forward, we're going to get into combat here, where this giant sort of beam cannon thing is going to be activated and start spewing out attacks every so often. So what we've got to do really fast is run up, engage in combat, which is likely going to be enough to pull Vela to where you need her to be, kind of in the middle there. But pretty much the standard stuff. Brilliant departure away, withdraw Vela, get yourself healed up, get yourself buffed up, and just keep Vela safe from the, of course, beam cannon thing that's just kind of shooting as you go. Now what we're going to do first is try to destroy the 2 sigils that are powering this cannon, and we're going to do that by running over there and of course just dropping AoEs on it. Now what you can also do is use your wall of fire method to of course kill some of the superfluous enemies if you want to go a slightly slower route to deal with them before you drop your AoEs on the sigil stones, because if you do that, destroy them that is, it will actually summon in more enemies to this fight on that side of the room. So you do have to be a little careful about when you destroy these things. Now the reason you might want to use that wall of fire method is that some of these guys are capable of stunning you, which is just really annoying. It likely won't kill you as long as you're buffed up appropriately, but it just gets tiresome. So that's why you might want to go the wall of fire route. But eventually you'll get those sigil stones dead, you'll get all of these enemies down, and we are pretty much free to continue onwards. Now, right above this fight where we just were, we'll confront Mara, a woman who was here that the archmages were looking for. And we'll get the last bit of information we need to head to the last portion of this, because once we step through the door here, we'll be back in that sort of big library area. From here, we can interact with the sort of central pedestal and picture the key and the knowledge of how to use it to open up the final area into the depths below. That is to say, inside the body of Whale's Titan. And as we move forward, we can see that there are 3 little valves here that are sealed off that we need to unseal in order to get where we're going, as it were. So our next goal is basically to systematically clear this little room so we can get down further into where we need. We're going to do that by casting Halt on Vela, then taking the right passage up until we hit the spores, which is where we're going to Archimir's Brilliant Departure away, go back to the beginning, buff up, use a spiritual ally to drag enemies from the left side of the map over to where Vela ultimately is so we can get her terrified and in position before we start clearing this entire place, as there's a little bit of stuff to go through here. But basically we want to engage in all the enemies we can. Now when we're ready to go and we're buffed, we're going to go up and to the right to where the spores were, but we're not going to attack them straight out. What we're going to do instead is get them grouped up, then hit them with Storm of Holy Fire, and then immediately kind of just run away from the area from the big guys. As if you're not careful, they can bypass your protection sort of all at once. Once the main group is dead and you're just left with the 2 stationary spores, we're basically just going to do what we did repeatedly until they're dead. We're going to come in, drop Storm of Holy Fire on them, and then run away where they can't reach us until they die, because those 2 in particular are what can kill you. Once they're dead, we're going to go left out of that room, where we can steal some star metal, which will engage in a fight with some spirits, which can't really do anything now, so we can just drop them. And we can continue left down that path to fight a room full of fleshy monstrosities, which is easy enough. Just group them up, Storm of Holy Fire, no big deal. And then from here, we can actually destroy the sort of eye that is looking at us in this room, and that will open the door, but also clear out one of the valves we need to kill. Now from there, we can go south to where we spiritual allied enemies previously, but we're going to run past that first room, skip it entirely, and go to the second room, which is where we actually need to be. There's going to be some sort of scientist types down here, and we're going to kill everybody here. Now, killing these guys should ultimately clear combat, but that's what we want, but we're not done quite yet. Now, once that's done, we're going to loot everything super fast, including picking the lock on this stuff so we can get what we need. First, we're going to open that door, but then using what we just stole, we'll be able to place the alchemist stuff to sort of blow up this sort of intestine type thing, which will unlock the second thing we need to clear out that bile to get further in. Now, from there, we're going to go back to where the spores were, loot their bookshelves, then put their books on the pedestals in this room to then interact with the middle pedestal to open up the door right to our south. Then we're going to halt Vela in this room and start combat with the enemies that are in that room we just were in, that we just opened up, before getting buffed up and killing those enemies. Now you do need to be careful. There is an enemy in here that can strip your buffs away, but it shouldn't be a big deal to deal with them just very quickly before they get a chance to do that. You just need to be careful in here. Now in here, you'll get a fungal agent that you can combine with spores from the spore room in order to throw into the bile pool here to kill this intestine, which opens up the last sort of area we need to be in, where we can go fight the Oracle of Whale. Now by dropping down that sort of central area, we enter into a conversation with this one, and we're immediately going to stealth after that conversation is over, drag Vela over to the left, halt her, go start combat. You're likely going to get hit here with a ray pretty much immediately, but the gist, as always, Archimir's Brilliant Departure. Secure Vela, cast Barring Death's Door on yourself so that initial attack doesn't kill you, and then start getting yourself buffed up. Once you're invisible and Vela's withdrawn, the Oracle will actually just kind of go back to what it was doing. Once we are buffed up, what we're going to start doing is killing these arcane batteries around the room. The Oracle of Whale will go around sort of breaking capsules to fill the room with bile, but don't worry about it too much, but it will make you walk slow. Now, once you destroy the initial adds, we can get to destroying those arcane batteries. Destroying those sort of arcane batteries makes the Oracle of Whale weaker, which is obviously what we want. Once those are dead, the arcane batteries that is, we can then focus our attention on the Oracle. Now, once the Oracle gets down to each stage of its life, it will summon in help, and every time that happens, you need to Brilliant Departure away, make sure Vela's protected, but also try to drop these enemies really, really quickly, kind of by themselves and isolated. If you do it that way, they'll die super fast and won't have a chance to do anything, but they can be dangerous if you let them group up. Mostly because they can stun you, but with all of the arcane batteries and everything destroyed, the Oracle of Whale just really isn't a threat to you, and you can kind of slowly whittle it down this way, and eventually you'll win that fight. Now, it is important here, after the conversation with Whale triggers, to kill the Oracle of Whale in the next dialogue option you're going to get. That is required because the Oracle has to die for the challenge to be complete. Once that's done though, you can exit this area back into the central area where we met the archmages. You can talk with them, wrap that up, which will count the DLC as complete. You can buy anything else you need from the imp merchant, which is the last chance you're going to have a chance to do anything. So buy everything you need from that merchant right now, because we're pretty much at the end here, because right after this, we are going to leave the Forgotten Sanctum via the newly opened exit, which is going to drop us much closer to where we need to be, at least in terms of our ship, mind you. And then we're going to walk the much shorter distance to our ship before sailing around the bottom of the island, and then going kind of northeast. We're basically going to go north specifically until we hit Tikawara. Tikawara is a location that will have been marked on our map thanks to the Valiant Trade Company, but once you hit that, then you're going to take a sharp turn northeast. What we're looking for, while avoiding the storms, mind you, is a place alongside Magrin's Teeth, which is on the far side of the map, which is where the final mega boss is, the Rune Master. You're likely going to be running out of food at this point, but don't worry about it too much, but find the Brine Grotto. This is essentially, again, where Magrin's Teeth is, pretty much where we need to be, as a matter of fact. Now, this is our last mega boss fight. This fight is a little complicated, but I wouldn't say it's hard. So this is against the Sigilmaster, or the Rune Master, as I kind of tend to call it sometimes, but as always, start combat preferably with a trap this time. We want to be real safe here in the beginning for reasons I'll explain in just a moment, but we want to start combat by getting the 2 adds that are with the Sigilmaster to walk over a trap using things like spark crackers to distract them. Then we're going to pull Vela down to the very entrance of the cave, use that opportunity to buff up accordingly. Once we are fully buffed up, we can make our move, of course, after using a spiritual ally to halt Vela down here via her terrified state. Now, once that's done, what we're going to do is walk up to the Sigilmaster in stealth, and then we're going to use Wall of Fire to kill her adds. This is important. We want to isolate the Sigilmaster, because what the Sigilmaster does is stand in the middle of this room and activate her sigils. Each sigil that she activates will have a various effect. One of them will completely wipe all of your buffs, and if that hits you, there's a high chance you might die. Now, the nice thing about this is that the Sigilmaster literally cannot move thanks to a status effect of theirs. Now, the goal here is not to actually damage the Sigilmaster at first. You tap the Sigilmaster, which will get her to activate sigils, and then you can use your AoEs to attack that sigil in the brief opening you have when it's not protected by these orbs. Now, the one on the bottom right is the one that can clear all of your buffs from you. So you need to be especially wary of that one. It actually managed to clear my buffs at one point, but luckily I was not in danger at the time, so it didn't kill me or anything. Once all 5 of those sigils are down, you can focus, of course, on the Sigilmaster herself, which is a little bit easier. Now, when she gets really far down in health is when you have to worry about her, because she activates some sort of last-ditch measures. But remember, she can't move even now, so basically what you do is drop AoEs and then run away from her towards the bottom until she gets pretty low, because then she'll start casting Essential Phantom like we were doing earlier in the playthrough. And we have to avoid, accidentally letting those guys kill Vela by getting them too close. They're not much of a threat, honestly. You just need to make sure they don't kill Vela, basically. But over time, you should eventually be able to kill the Sigilmaster. It takes a little bit of practice, but it's not terribly hard once you know what to do. Now, from there, we find ourselves heading towards the very end. You see, from the Briny Grotto, we're going to go up the left, and we're going to follow this chain of islands, which is called ultimately Magrin's Teeth. We're going to follow that right until they turn black, which is where the volcanoes technically start, until we see the word Ophicia Channel right here. We're going to stop right here. We're going to go down to the deck of our ship. We're going to use an Oil of Allure and our Diplomacy Ring to buff up our diplomacy. Then we're going to check and make sure that our diplomacy is over 20. Here it was 21. You have to hit at least 20 diplomacy to make this next check. But once that's done, we go into our inventory and use the sword to summon the ghost ship by speaking the oath we learned from Captain Aeldis. This summons the ghost ship, and then through dialogue we can basically say that we will exchange the sword for the ship, and then we'll give Lucia here the sword, and we get the floating hangman, provided you have the diplomacy to pass the check. Now once we have the floating hangman, all we've got to do, finally, is then sail right through Andra's mortar. Now, this is the part of the game where there's various ways to get through this, typically by siding with a faction or buffing up your own ship, and in this case, we technically sided with the Principi to get the ghost ship to sail right through the mortar without any problems, which is like a giant storm that is never ending, and typically it batters ships until they die so they can't reach the legendary Ukaizo, which is the final area of the game. Now, once we're through Andra's mortar, we're going to come up on Ukaizo, only to be met with the Guardian of Ukaizo, the final boss, and the very last member of the ultimate challenge that we haven't killed yet. Now, what we're going to do immediately, right as combat starts, is Archimir's Brilliant Departure, withdraw Vela, and then immediately cast Spiritual Ally while you're invisible. We're going to then use that Spiritual Ally to run all the way up to the northern side of the map. What this is going to do is distract both the Guardian of Ukaizo as well as all of these adds that started the fight with him and get them away from us. Once that's done, because we're not, attackable or anything, they will actually start leaving us alone, and this is going to give us the room we need to start buffing. Now, you may have noticed when you pass through Andra's mortar that all of the buffs we had fell off just like they did in the Seeker Slayer Survivor DLC, which means we can't rely on some of those to actually fight the Guardian with. But once we're buffed up, what we can actually do is go around and kill the adds that were a part of this fight by using a Spiritual Ally to draw them to you, which is how you can terrify Vela to get her in place, and then you can start taking these guys out. Now, you actually have a good bit of wiggle room here without aggroing the Guardian of Ukaizo, like probably more than you'd think, but you can use Archimir's Brilliant Departure to make sure that they leave you alone anyway. But you're largely free to attack these guys on the sides without being attacked by the Guardian. Now, once all of those initial adds are destroyed, you can attack the Guardian itself, and the only thing to really watch out here for is that it has an attack called like Corrosive Spit or something that can occasionally just remove a single buff from you, so you need to really make sure it doesn't remove anything important. Halfway through this fight myself, it managed to hit the ability that was giving me my brilliant buff, which means I had to sort of reset all of my buffs mid-fight by Archimiring away, only to, rebuff and then rejoin the fight. But generally, what you want to do here is hit the Guardian with Console Hot's Crushing Doom and Storm of Holy Fire combined. It's the best way to put through some damage. Now, at 75% health, this thing is going to summon in the two big statues next to it. This is where we're going to sort of stop combat, basically, by, stealthing away with Brilliant Departure, and then getting those statues to go back to their starting position. Once that's done, we can then take them out individually, before turning our attention back to the Guardian. Now, once the Guardian is down to 50% health, it brings in two Hierophants. Now, the Hierophants are especially dangerous because they can charm you, and we're no longer immune to that because we lost our buff on the way here. So when the Hierophants get summoned, immediately get out of combat via Brilliant Departure, get yourself invisible again, make sure Vela's safe, and then what you can do is walk up to the Hierophants and use the Wall of Fire method to slowly kill them without any danger to yourself. Once they are both dead, we can turn our attention back fully to the Guardian, and at this point it's just a slugfest of Console Hot's Crushing Doom and Storm of Holy Fire until it dies. And then at that point, the quest called the Ultimate that will have been in your quest log will have cleared. This should be the very last boss we needed if you've been following along to have actually killed everything. And at this point, you're almost done. We just have to finish the last part. There is, however, one more part to go. From here, we make our way through Ukaizo. There's really only one direction to go. Up a tower to do the story stuff here, and ultimately stop the raging storms. But when we come down from that tower, we're going to be confronted by an enemy faction. In this case, Captain Aeldus. Now, this fight is inevitable. You can't really talk your way out of it. As soon as it starts, and you might need to practice this on a separate save file, but immediately you have to Archimir's Departure away. You should have halted Vela on the stairs right as you enter this area, so she's nowhere nearby. But immediately as combat starts, Archimir's away, go withdraw Vela, get yourself buffed up, and try to get Vela as far into the stairs as you can so these guys don't accidentally aggro onto her or anything. Now, once you are fully buffed up, you are, of course, free to attack these guys, but they will cast things like Arcane Dampener at you. So once you are ready, once Vela is terrified in position and everything, what you actually want to do is go get these guys rounded up and use the Wall of Fire method because it is by far the safest and most effective method so you don't get stunned because you're not immune to any afflictions because we lost our buffs, so nobody tries to attack Vela, and so you don't drop the ball right here at the finish line because this is the very last fight. So while it will take a little bit longer, I highly recommend you do the Wall of Fire method to kill all of these guys, because it's simply not worth the risk, I think, to do otherwise, given that these enemies can and will kill you if you give them the chance to, thanks to things like Arcane Dampener and whatnot. But once they are all dead, we're finally free to go across Ukaizo to the very last area where we can meet Aethys, have our end-of-game conversation with him, sort of choose your ending more or less. And once that's done, the credits will roll and you'll be able to click back into Magran's Fires to hopefully see the fully completed list here, and you will have completed the ultimate for Pillars of Eternity to Deadfire, which is where, of course, this video is going to wrap up, and more importantly, the series is going to wrap up. And I sincerely hope that it was helpful to you in some way. I spent a lot of time studying other runs for this, and then, of course, trying it for myself. Over the years, actually, I've made prior attempts before I was finally successful with my own 15th official run, and it is my sincere hope that people use this walkthrough in order to complete it for themselves, because as a reminder, if you send in your save game as well as the full footage of the run to Obsidian, they still have like 35 patches to hand out to people. So if you wind up managing to successfully do this and this guide help you, I would love to hear about that. But for now, that has been the walkthrough of the Ultimate for Pillars of Eternity 2. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.